In the 1920s, you have this curious, fabulous mix of people from all different backgrounds, middle class, low class, all coming and mixing in the confines of Block and Pennsy. This is actually a 1928 heat map, and so here is Block and Pennsy. So this is what it looked like in 1928. And starting in 1919, there was the National Steel Strike. Before that, you already had Mexican populations working in agriculture and working on the railroad, because as the Transcontinental Railroad, that was starting in Mexico going into the United States. The Mexicans were legally recruited to break the strike. So they were being recruited off of the rail lines and the fields in the United States to work as strike breakers. So they were put on barges in Chicago and then literally shipped into Indiana Harbor, so they just kind of went into the back doors. Because they were strikebreakers, there was still this anti-sentiment of the Mexican population, so that's where they were kind of like racially segregated. At first they were hired, when they were recruited by like Inland Steel, they actually lived kind of like almost in like company housing close to Block and Pennsy, and then they kind of moved out, but they never really, up until the 60s, moved out of those boundaries. I interviewed a gentleman who's now 101 years old, Fred Maravilla, and he talks about there was just no room, and his family lived in a garage, and they bought, as they call, ticks, which are mattresses to stuff straw in to sleep. They would do their business in a pot and dump it out. They were behind an apartment building, and then also multiple people were living in small closed and confined places that the health department would just probably be aghast about. On Google Maps, this is what it looks like today. It's all it's demolished. Doesn't really exist. So it's 60s, infrastructure. So Klein Avenue had raised, cut through that neighborhood. Urban revitalization happened. So sometimes when people mention addresses, places where they lived, or I look that up and I find that, and sometimes it's just an empty lot on like Google Maps. And so these communities have been erased. I do have a childhood friend, he lives in New York City now, and so we talk about, and his mother grew up in the harbor. I think we're both like third generation. And he said, oh yeah, every time we drive on Klein Avenue, we get to a certain point, and my aunts always say, oh, we're driving over our house, because that's where their house was. And you have this across the United States, so you just have it in all urban areas.